Welcome to the Right Room with Hilary Phelps. Today's guest is a trailblazer in every sense of the word. Dr. Sam DuFlo is a passionate community builder, a visionary, and a fierce advocate for destigmatizing topics that are often swept under the rug. She's a single mother, an entrepreneur, a talented public speaker, and a true Renaissance woman who's just as comfortable designing clinics and building pollinator gardens as she is transforming lives through her groundbreaking work in pelvic health. After surviving a life-changing heart attack at just 41, she's here to share her inspiring story of resilience, self-discovery, and rewriting the rules of what it means to live authentically. It's time to dive into the world of empowerment, health, and healing with the incredible Dr. Sam. Welcome to the show. Hello, Sam, Dr. Sam. Welcome to the Right Room. How are you?
Hi, Hilary. Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Okay, we have a lot to cover, and this happens often with women, like really interesting women that I have on. We start to have this conversation before we even hit record. And so we're going to try to have some of that same conversation here. But I want to start, your story is really one of resilience and reinvention. And we're going to talk a lot about that. But I want to start with a moment that really shifted everything was you shared your heart attack. Right? In August of 2024. And how did that experience shape your perspective on life and the way you approach work and motherhood?
Well, I'm only 41 and I'm a marathoner. I, work in women's health and I practice what I preach and I kind of do all the things. And so I'll start by saying I never had chest pain. I never had chest pain or shortness of breath. And luckily, I was on the phone with my regional director and I was complaining of scapular and thoracic pain. And she was like, you need to go to the emergency room. And I was like, nah, there's no chance. But I did. I drove myself to the emergency room, which was ill-advised. And I was in the process of having a heart attack. And I think that my brain I think I'm just now really processing what happened, because I'm so accustomed to being the doer of all things. I'm a single mom. I have a 6-year-old. She's with me full time. And I founded and operated and ran Indigo, my women's healthcare business, for the past 9 years. And so it was like my first reaction was oh, I'm having a heart attack. Okay, I need to call childcare. I need to call work. I need to cancel this meeting that I have. It wasn't really turning the lens on myself. And I went back to work after a few days, as soon as I got back out of the hospital, and then really starting to take those layers down and process them. It was sort of a shock. Not sort of, it was really shocking to have a heart attack at this age. And people kept asking how they could help. And I think when you're so used to being hyper independent that I didn't even know what to respond with. The people are like, how can I help you? And I'm like, I don't even know how to allocate or accept help in this way. And it's still, it's only been until November, December, it's been less than 5 months. So right now I'm really taking some time to process what that means, because I don't need to make a lot of lifestyle changes. But really, I've always been the kind of person, Hilary, that's okay, well, I don't want to wait till I'm retired to travel or spend time with my family or do those things. But, I'm used to working 80 or 100 hours a week. And it forced me to very much reevaluate that we are only guaranteed today. And I am a pillar of health. And this was quite surprising to everybody around me. And so I had to really dial in, okay, moving forward, what do I want my life to look like? And what sacrifices will I have to make in order to make that happen? What shifts, what transitions, and where do I really align with joy and spending time with my family? And so it's been a really pivotal moment in my life, for sure. And you kind of make it. I know, Hilary, you've been through a lot too. And I think that as very independent women, we turn it into a joke. People are like, how are you doing? And I'm like, I'm so happy to be on this side of the dirt.
6 feet above ground. Great.
absolve people of their feeling like, ooh, can I ask you about this? Like, what's like, how are you feeling? And you have to kind of turn it and reassure people that like you're okay. Uh, but there's been some high moments and some really low moments. And I'm still kind of digging into what that means for me and who I am, because there is a before and there is an after. And so August 23rd really drew a line in the sand for me for like what is after that for me, because I'm lucky enough to be around for it. I got to the hospital in time. So
I mean, yeah, they say, some of those things, it's like a seismic shift, right? Like those big things happen in our life and we're like, okay, I got it. I got the wake up call. Like now I need to either make a decision or continue to live that life, right? And what was coming up for me as you were sharing this is we're so used to living in chaos sometimes. I'll speak for myself, like living in chaos. Like chaos feels really comfortable. Like it's to juggle, right? To
yeah,
be the single mom and to run the business and to say yes and to show up for school and to do all of these things that when we step back and we're like, wait, well, what does it look like to have a little bit of peace and calm on the other side? And it's like kind of letting go of some of that control feels almost more scary than actually staying in the chaos. I mean, does that resonate with you?
it does. And I feel like it's like it's very challenging to slow down, because even my rest is like, oh, I'll go for a 15-mile run, you know? Or I'll do, I garden and landscape a lot. And so it's like, oh, I'll go haul trees around, dig holes and all this kind of like manual stuff. And so like really sitting down and giving myself permission to do something like binge watch a TV series, which is not in my MO. And then you have to undo this thinking that we've been indoctrined with, that you're not being productive when you're doing those things. So yes, I think we're used to living in chaos. And then rest is like, it's strange, Hillary. We're like hyper aware of the need of like self-care and like avoiding burnout. And so we like meditate and go to acupuncture and work out and do all these things. But there's still like, those are still all things that are like scheduled in this.
We're doing, we're not just being.
Yeah.
Right. And it's hard. And I was sharing this with you before this book on Honor Our Best Behavior. And she talks about that, how the 7 deadly sins, apply to women, and how sloth, like how we're told if we rest, we're lazy, or we should be doing more. And if we're not achieving things on our check sheet or to-do list, then we're not worthy of the rest. Like we almost have to earn our rest. And I feel like that's a big misnomer. Maybe not a misnomer. Maybe I'm trying to make it a misnomer, but that's kind of, I feel like, how women operate in the world. Like, okay, well, I got, I did the dishes, I made dinner for everyone, I did the laundry, I had this cleaned up. Okay, now I can sit. But then you sit and you see something, you're like, no, I've got to go clean that up, or I should be reading, or I should be doing something for my business, right? Like there's always something to be doing. And that's where it's hard, right? That idea of like the masculine and the feminine energy. The masculine is always that doing. It's hard to just be. But so does that show up like in parenting for you? And I ask this because it does for me, right? Like sometimes I have a hard time just being. When my child's like, do you want to build? I'm like, what's the point? Like, where are we going with this? Right? Like there has to be an end goal for it. Do you feel that?
For me, the self-reflection is really that I try to be very present with her when I'm with her. But when you've been overachieving and overdoing throughout your entire workday, from like, I'm a very early riser. So 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm, getting a couple hours of work in. My daughter gets up. We're like doing breakfast, making lunch, like getting everybody out the door. And then I'm doing all day long. And then when I get her at the end of the day, my battery is so drained that I feel like, or I was feeling like, my time with her wasn't as valuable. I didn't have a full battery to really give her. And then when I did have like a quote unquote day off where it was just me and I had solo time once every 2 weeks or so, I felt so low on energy that I couldn't schedule anything for myself. So those things that normally bring me joy, I was so burned out and fatigued from doing all of those things that on that one day, I felt like I couldn't even interact with people, that I was just like, needed to like crawl in bed or just super decompress. And so now that I'm allocating my time and my energy levels differently, that it does translate into more quality time with my child, which is really the ultimate goal. And we can play. And I think you're onto something too, because I believe, Hilary, that when you're so high functioning and driven and ambitious and all the, like these hustler words that are used for women that are in a lot of leadership and growth and entrepreneurial enterprises, we're so creative in our jobs and in our thought leadership. And it's so highly intelligent that when you have to scale that back and just do like very basic imaginary play, it's hard for us because we are not used to being like children. We're used to being like the top tier of thought leadership. And so I'm really trying to practice like nurturing that childlike self and doing play. But it's hard. You're like, dinner. We don't have 30 minutes for me to explain every step.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the clock, and then after dinner, I know it takes an hour. Then we have to get in the bath, because if we don't get in bed by this time, then you're tired the next day, right? And so all of those processes. So over Christmas, we started coloring. We started printing coloring sheets from this mandala like website and coloring together. And after, he was like, "That was so fun. Can we do that again?" I'm like, "Yeah," because there's something like childlike, but also mindful about coloring that we both loved, and so.
We do that too. We do a lot of art. We do a lot of kind of like nature exploration. But with on the go, it's just like, and really with this weather that we've had recently, sometimes it's about just like hunkering down together and just having like, my daughter said the other day, I was like, "Are you ready to just be cozy?" And she was like, "I was born to be cozy." And I was like, "I'm so glad that you have a different mindset than I was hammered into growing up."
I love her. Well done, Mama. Well done in instilling that in her. Right. Born to be cozy.
Let's watch a movie. Let's be cozy.
I mean, well, so talking about this, you showed you're a single parent. You raised your daughter on your own. And that in and of itself brings profound challenges, right? And ways to navigate life. But what are those experiences taught you kind of about navigating life, unexpected twists, and finding that strength in vulnerability?
A few different things. One is, I've been raising her solo since she was basically an infant. And so you don't know, right? I don't know what it's like to co-parent with somebody else in the house and share emotional and mental labor. So I don't really know what the other side is or what that would look like. And for me, the vulnerability is in that, yeah, we watch a movie on Friday nights and like that screen time's okay with me. We're still spending time together. We're making dinner together, ordering something together, and I am a great mom, but it's hard to take that feedback of like, shouldn't be feeding my kid like chicken nuggets. And sometimes you just have like, we're all eating and we balance it throughout the week. And then I think the vulnerability of, you really realize as a single parent, and you might relate to this, but time just looks so different and your energy and bandwidth just looks so different. So I'm a distance runner. And in the summers here on the East Coast, it can get really hot. I can't get up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning and do my long run because my child would be left home alone. And so you just have to, your day and your life just has to shift. I think the other thing about being a single parent that I realized really early on was that I love my child so much. But in order to love her best, I still need to be a whole person and fulfill my hopes and dreams. And one of the things that I really love to do is travel internationally. And so when she was 2, I started bringing her with me. And it doesn't look the same and it doesn't feel the same. But, she's been to El Salvador and Costa Rica, and she's been to Nicaragua a bunch of times, and she's done border crossings on foot and, ridden a tuk-tuk and done these things. And I feel like because that's all she knows, that this is kind of like how we travel together and what we do, she's able to share that with me now. And that really fills a part of me that it doesn't have to look how everyone else does it, but I can still be me, and she can still be her, but it doesn't have to be the same as everything else. And I don't have to sacrifice all of those things.
I love that. So what came to mind is that, oh my gosh, taking your child in a tuk-tuk totally outweighs eating chicken nuggets on a Friday night. Like, wipes it clean.
Yes.
I mean, it's
Balance, but when your brain is
I understand that. Yeah.
in the moment, like that's what you and I feel a sense of pride, like when we sit on an airplane and adults will sit down next to us kind of tentatively, like, oh, there's a kid, and then at the end of the flight they'll be like, she travels better than most adults. Yeah, well, that's all she knows.
Yeah.
And so in giving her that kind of broader worldview. And I also think there's something vulnerable about saying, Hilary, like, I do work full time and there are sacrifices in that, in time and whatnot with her. But then she can also see that she sees me run on the treadmill in our basement, or she sees me taking care of myself in different ways, or she sees me leading a healthcare company and kind of like knows that I'm out there doing those things. And so it can be a different part of her story, a different thread of her story, a different inspiration for her about a strong woman leading that.
Yeah, because you're the example. I mean, you're showing her the example. You're not just talking and giving lip service. Like, you're actually out there doing the work and doing the leadership and running the companies and showing her that it's important to self-care. And that's a powerful example, right? And you'll never know how much that positively impacts her until she's older. But it seems like even at 6, some of that's showing up already with the, feedback from strangers on airplanes and saying how, and her saying, I was born to chill, or I was born to
Be cozy. Yeah.
I want to touch on the healthcare company. We mentioned it briefly in the beginning, but can you talk a little bit about Indigo and what that was like? What the kind of that process of formulating this? I mean, and I've had the wonderful pleasure of going to. I've seen the storefront or the. Oh my gosh. The center, the wellness studio. Oh, thank you. My brain's like, I'm like, what do I call this? And so I had a lovely experience. It felt really warm and cozy. It was really holistic and wonderful. And everyone's very like serene and calm. And so firsthand, I can vouch that it is different than anywhere I've ever seen. But I'd love to hear from you kind of your vision behind it and what it meant to launch that for you.
So I went to PT school thinking that I was going to work with runners, like female runners, and which I still do very much in the Olympic world and the high level athlete of women returning to sport postpartum and running prenatally. But I found that when I was working for a hospital outpatient practice doing physical therapy, and I immediately got into pelvic health. That was my first kind of go around. I did HIV/AIDS research in mother to child transmission in Malawi, in sub-Saharan Africa, and worked in rural healthcare clinics and really saw the impact on women's health and really wanted to be kind of involved. That was where my traveling kind of public health brain put me into this niche. And I kept feeling really constrained by a traditional healthcare system. There were some interesting things that happened to me, like in one of our professional courses during my doctorate program, and then in the hospital system that I worked for, it was very like, don't show tattoos. Now, granted, this was 10 years ago, so things have changed, but it was like, don't show tattoos. It was like, button up, like wear a polo and khakis and sneakers. And I have such a strong sense of self and like self brand that I don't need to flaunt that. But at the same time, I didn't want to have to hide the authentic portion of myself, because when somebody's coming to you for pelvic physical therapy, which is what Indigo does, then they're being so vulnerable with you. And if they're seeing that you're hiding part of yourself in that way, how can they feel trusting of you and not feel like they have to hide part of themselves? So I really launched Indigo because I felt like the traditional system of like me rolling around on a computer, watching people do exercises and seeing people like every 15 or 30 or 40 minutes wasn't enough for me to give folks the best care that I knew that they deserved. And I also just didn't want to work in that atmosphere. I knew that I didn't want to work in this busy gym with all of these folks. I'm an introvert. I knew I didn't want to see 22 clients a day. And I knew that I didn't really fit into that system. And so in order to prolong my working career, I had to create a system and a paradigm that I fit into and that my clientele fit into. Because we all, traditional healthcare was based on, most of the research is based on men. And then, like, all of this is evolving, and women's health is like a huge economic booster now, and is continuing to grow, especially in the femtech. But there's, there just wasn't, it was like there was all these outliers, and I was like, okay, well, all of these things are very common, but it doesn't mean they're normal. Like, leaking urine after you have a baby. People have for so long kind of poo-pooed that and said like, oh, well, you had a baby, like that's normal. And it's not, it's common. And so I founded Indigo, and it was just me. And this was 9 years ago. And I literally had a physician take me out to lunch and say, you are so great at what you do, and this will not succeed. And I think you're making a mistake, because I wasn't taking insurance. And he said, women will never pay for this kind of care. We have 8 locations across the region and over 60 employees. And we see over 1,000 patients a month, one-on-one for an hour. And we have 99% 5-star reviews on Google.
I just got goosebumps because there's part of me, right, that kind of like, right, and maybe it's that people telling you can't do it, right? And I've been told that too, like, you can't do it, this won't be successful, this won't work. But there's something intuitively that you knew.
Way to light a fire. Tell me I can't do something.
Yes. That's what I mean. Like, and you went with what you're like, you know what? I know this. I know that there's a space out there for this. This is in my heart. This is my inner voice. This is my guidance, my intuition, whatever you want to call it. And you did it. And I sound little, and I want to be like, oh my gosh, was that a man that told you that? And you're like, he said. I'm like, yep. And you did it.
Yeah.
What does saying that out loud feel like now? Like reflecting on that, because it's a huge deal just to go with what you knew or what you thought would work, right?
And I wasn't sure it would work. I mean, I was terrified. I got like, I lived on like ramen soup. I had like 6 clients my first week. I had, a ton of loans from medical school. And so I just kind of took a deep breath and took a leap in this. And I think a lot of people were like, this is a big mistake. And can you do this? Because I had also said I never wanted to. My dad worked for himself, and I was like, I never want to do that. So much stress and pressure. But then I also realized that my creative vision was in such an important lot, that was an important path for me to follow, to stay true to myself. And I think as women, Hilary, we are often told to neglect our intuition. And I also think that when you ask me like how I feel about that today, it's interesting because over the years when I've told that story, I've had some people kind of say like, well, you're not being very humble. And I'm just like, gosh, humble at this point. Like, look at what we've built. And
okay, can I just interrupt you for a second? And this sounds really whatever. If it was a man, they'd be like, well done, right? And I'm not a man hater, and I'm not this like big yay feminist, but I do believe that women should toot their horns and celebrate each other and celebrate their success just as much as anybody else. But we're told we're being too bold, we're being too loud. You should, nope, don't talk about it. That's gross, or you're too much. And we've been told that we're too much for too long. And so, you know what? I'm proud of you. Yell it from the rooftops. Like, you took this leap of faith into what you thought or hoped would work. You had a vision, you executed it, and 9 years later, here you are. You're amazing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is amazing. And it's really powerful, the impact that we've been able to make on so many different people's lives, and not sacrifice my core values in doing that. Additionally, I think it's like we are told to be like humble, and then we don't toot our own horns, and then we feel resentful, or like we feel imposter syndrome in some way. And so I've just kind of started to embrace like, yeah, I built this and it was incredible, and this was my vision. And I'm excited for what's next in my life and my journey and what I can create. But women are powerful, and it's really challenging, Hilary. I mean, I will tell you, when I first wanted to rent a space, a commercial space to have my first office, I couldn't even get people to call me back. Like, I was like Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman when she goes to Rodeo Drive. I have this money and no one will take it. And I was like, I was like, what is happening? No one like buys women's health. Like, I don't understand. I had to explain that I wasn't a massage therapist. And, like, it was a thing. And then there were some people that really believed in me and trusted me and built such a huge community around us. And now it's kind of, we've got Indigo has, we've hired a CEO and a board of directors, and it's kind of like very stable and continuing to scale. And it's a great thing. But I'm also excited for what's next. And, like we talked about having a heart attack, like what does this mean for my future and my creative endeavors, and what do I like to do and what brings me joy? And so I'm working on kind of transitioning to have more breathing room for that creative space now.
I mean, I love this, right? And I had kind of challenging these societal norms or what people think or what women should do. But I love what you said about it's common, but it's not normal. When you talk about like the leak, right? I mean, even that small change in language, I think is so important, because we're just told we just deal with it. Like, oh, you sneeze afterwards, it's just what happens. And it's like, well, it can, but it doesn't have to, right? And I feel like that's the change that you're making, or that's kind of the norm that you're challenging.
It's about giving a voice to folks, right?
Yeah.
And the number one question after 10 years of more than 12 years of clinical practice that I've received is, why didn't anybody tell me this sooner? Whether it's like, okay, well, these super heavy periods and blackout pain and vomiting during, your period is not normal. Like, you need to get checked out for endometriosis, or having chronic constipation, not normal. Having pain with sex, not normal. All of these things are common and very, very, very treatable. Endometriosis is its own bag, but pain with sex, constipation, pain postpartum, broken tailbones, hip pain, all of these things, abdominal separation or diastasis recti, are very common things, but they're very treatable. And so it's about giving a voice to these things. And I think that's where social media has done a great job over the past, 4 to 6 years, is really leveraging and amplifying the voice of women's health in a lot of ways to get knowledge. And we have to be a little bit careful, because influencer does not necessarily mean expert, and there is misinformation out there, but there is more information and empowerment and advocacy for folks to say, like, you don't have to leak urine at any age. You don't have to go through all this hoopla like in perimenopause, whether it's perinatal, whether it's when you're first starting to have sexual intercourse, whether you're undergoing gender affirmation surgery and you have scar tissue. There's so many different levels that we can receive really good health care. And it's about people knowing that it even exists.
And that's what I was going to comment on, that, knowing that it exists, because, and this is a little bit of a personal story from when I went, we're told, well, you read, right? There's a lot of information out there, right? So you read that Kegels, like doing, after you have a child, those are really important to tighten, right? Like tighten, 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 tighten.
I hate the word tighten so much.
My therapist.
Yeah.
Well, she said to me, she's like, you're tight, like you're fine. But like, that you can also push out.
Yeah.
You should probably not do it this.
Yeah.
She's like, but you don't have there's a pull and a push.
Yeah.
I'm not explaining this in a very medical way, but you can keep, and she's like, the pull is great. The push, like, you're really weak. And we're told that we pull. You're supposed to pull, right? Make that muscle strong, make that muscle whatever. But there's not. And I was like, oh, and so that was my kind of moment of like this individualized, like whether it's medicine or healthcare, any kind of functional nutrition or medicine is so important to the individual. And I feel like that's where your practice really excels, right? Because you really look at the woman and what, because she said, I was like, well, I have this back pain. And she's like, well, your glutes are really weak. I was like, well, I probably just need to go to a chiropractor and just get adjusted. She's like, I'm telling you, like, this is what, and I'm like, but I'm an athlete and I'm going to keep going. And then I overdid it. Right. So then the doctor gave me these exercises and I came back and I was like, well, I'm really sore. And she's like, well, tell me about what you did. And I was like, it's just, you did twice as many as I told you to. And I'm like, yeah, because then it's going to go like, and I know this, right? It's going to go faster. I'm going to get better quicker. And she's like, doesn't work that way with your.
That's such an interesting analysis on how we have been raised from like patriarchal notions and raised by boomers and whatnot. And in this like new age of feminism of like, oh, we'll hustle it. Like, you're going to hustle your own self-care. I have grit. I'm going to do 30 glute min exercises instead of 10. And that overflow will make my pelvic floor even tighter. And now I have to go back. Like,
exactly what happened.
so the pelvic floor, or we call it the pelvic diaphragm, interchangeable, but it's a set of muscles. And so just like your biceps muscle, if you're like stuck like this and you're really tight, and then I tell you to do like 100 Kegels or 100 contractions, like you're just doing it in this narrow kind of tension. And so you need that full length of the muscle in order to create tension. So it's this common overprescribed exercise to say, we should do strengthening when you're leaking urine. And that is not accurate and without getting checked out. Because the thing is that you can have scar tissue from an episiotomy or a tear, or your muscles can be really tight. If your muscle is tight, like my biceps showing you here, it's like clenched and tight. I can't lift a coffee cup if it's like this. And so it assumes, it perceives as weakness, but it's really tight. So pelvic floor contractions or Kegels are very overprescribed. And that's where we try to thread out from social media and other things. Like, I mean, I had a second-degree tear with my daughter because she was born sunny side up with her arm at her face, which is a testament to how fierce she still is. When I was like, I had just like moved into like the mother baby unit, and, the nurse, who was very good intentioned, was like, you can start your Kegels. And I was like, no, I just had a grade 2 tear. Like, this all has to heal. I need to work on scar tissue. I need to work on relaxing and releasing. And so, and most people don't know, like yourself, Hilary, that like, if you're really tight in those areas and you're overcompensating, you can be really weak in others, like your glutes. Breastfeeding can atrophy your glute muscles too.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a fun fact. I call it, it's like a letter B, like postpartum, like your boobs are big, your belly's like squishy and you can't figure it out. And then your butt's like, where'd it go? And so we need to work on glute min, glute med, and different things. It's all about how this like vast amount of estrogen and then the depletion and like the atrophy that can occur from breastfeeding. It doesn't mean we don't breastfeed. It just means that we're aware of this so that like, people go back to running or exercise or things like that. Like, we have to be cognizant that we've undergone this really great physiological change. It's not just about losing weight. It's about rebuilding muscle, bone health, like all of these other different parallels.
It's the first time I've heard that breastfeeding can.
Yeah.
Because I was just felt like they were just gone. And I was like, oh, well,
mom, but
I haven't been working out, or I haven't, like, right. I'm not good enough. That's the voice. I must be doing something wrong. Not that it's a normal thing that happens in the body.
It's like, the flat, wide shape of glutes. And it's because we often don't know a lot of these things. And then, you are more sedentary, which you should be when you initially give birth. And, your alignment and things change and your body position changes. But a lot of it is how our body's like storing fat and using resources and like what it's allocating and physiologically. And so it's not that that's gone forever. It's just we need to rebuild it and strengthen it in a different way.
And that's really interesting because as a former Division I athlete, Ironman, just like you, I'm more of a distance. I'd rather run hundreds of miles, I mean, not literally, slow than do anything sprint and fast, right? But so when something comes up,
track workout, and I'm a coach, and you can't beg me to do a track workout. I'm just, no.
I will run for an hour versus do 5 minutes of sprints any day. Like, and so when, I hear that, you're right. And like being an athlete, I'm like, well, the more my brain is like going all over the place right now because I think this is so important. Like this information, letting women know, right? Because it's also, we also are told, I think in culture and society, like get the body back, right? Like you're saying, versus like, no, when you have a child, you should rest. It doesn't mean you shouldn't breastfeed. You should just be aware of it, right? It's like giving the information and then allowing the space and the time for women to heal naturally, right? And then be able to come back. But as an athlete, as a type A woman, as all these things, I'm like, more is better. Right. So what do I do?
And I think especially like, I'm going to really pigeonhole us distance runners here. Like we use it as a source of like mental health, right? Like it's our identity. And when you're already undergoing a transition to parenthood or motherhood, and you lose so much of your physical autonomy because somebody's literally physically on you all the time. And now you can't go do this thing that really helps you mentally and physically, that when you're already undergoing a big physiological stress, that's really hard for people. And they want to get back out. I would say most runners that I see or athletes, when they're postpartum, they're not eager to get back into their running kicks because they want to lose 10 pounds. They're just like, they need to feel free. They need to go run and think or not think and just have some autonomy and feel like themselves. And that's something that they've really identified with. So it's not all about rest. It's just about taking the right steps in the right places. Like, you just want to build the foundation of your transverse abdominis and your glutes and your pelvic floor so that when you do return to running, that you can do that really successfully. Otherwise, you like run and then you get injured, and you run and you get injured. And it's better to have a really good quality of this. And it's hard for us to slow down. I like running, and I'm sure you do too, Hilary, because I just can put on a pair of sneakers and leave my house. And I don't have to futz with like signing up for a class or taking, and as a new parent, you're like, I don't have much time. I've got like 30 minutes. Like, I can go get this quick workout in and come back. But there's a lot of these things that take a lot of time. And I think this also threads into politically and like where our country is at, is that, the majority, it's something like 60 to 70% of women in this country go back to work within 10 days of giving birth. And so when we have that pressure and lack of paid leave, people tend to skip a lot of these steps of like, it's not just like resting for the baby or having skin to skin contact or breastfeeding or lactating or pumping. It's about, you and this greatest physiological change that your body can physically endure. Like, your DNA has changed for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And you went, you birthed a human out of your body. And now
After growing the human in your body, after growing it, right, for night, and then you birthed it. So
and then 6
parts.
weeks later, you're going to go on a 4-mile run versus like if you had an Achilles tear or an ACL, and the ACL is like this big, you have an ACL tear, and it's like, well, you're going to have surgery and da-da-da-da-da, and then you can't run and you're not weight bearing, and then you are weight bearing, and you'll probably back to like your full level capability after like a year. But we're telling people after they have a child, like 6 weeks, good to go.
So where does the change come? It sounds like a lot: cultural, political, societal, familial. Like, where does the biggest change come from? If it's top down, right? I think independently has to come from you, right? The woman saying like, F all of that. I'm going to do what I need to do. But where's the loudest or the biggest change in that space going to come from?
It's hard, right? Because like I went back to work at like 3.5, 4 weeks postpartum because I had to. I didn't have any to work for me. I had to make money for my daughter and and I worked for myself. I didn't have paid maternity leave. And so even though I'm the strongest advocate of that, I wasn't a good example of that. And so people don't have the economic resources in most cases to be able to say F the system. And I think that it comes from women talking in community. Everything that I've
Amen to community.
Like few years is that like it is about community. And because as a community, we band together and then we can spread information and support each other. And then that takes it up to the next level and to the next level.
This book that I was just telling you about that I'm going to highlight in the show, it talks about that, how women, how intentionally, right? I'm going about this patriarchy hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, they started to divide women and going into this nuclear family only because women together, a strong community of women, will change the world, will change society, will change politics, will change, like we will change it because our voice matters, but nobody wants us to, I say nobody, like us coming together is really powerful, right? And so I love this that you talk about women in community. And other different, cultures, they have that, like the red tent, like nurture women when they go through their menstrual cycle or when they have a child, like the community comes together and brings food. And we've gotten to the space where it's divided, like we're all divided. Nope, to each his own, like stay in your lane, right? So I love that you say that community is a source of change.
And I think it even at this point it crosses genders, right? Because I think people are, in modern parenting and birthing, you're finding same-sex couples or trans folks, inclusive across all genders and sexualities. Like, people are having babies and they're more aware of these cultural norms and the lack of support systems. And so they're really reaching out and trying to develop more community. And I think as long as we continue to kind of like cohabitate in these communities and support each other and have a voice to this and lend a voice to that, that will flow up. Can't say I'm like, I think advocating at a top-down level and supporting those organizations that support paid leave and different things like that is highly critical. I just don't think it's the only thing we can do. I think we have to kind of sandwich it in that way to make true change. And then I also think, my clients, they go back to their physicians and they say, hey, this really helped me. And then the physicians then say to their next patient, like, oh, hey, this really helped. It's not me going to the physicians and say, hey, look at all these great things we do, because it doesn't land. It's about the people talking about their experience, and mothers tend to want to help each other and share their personal experiences. What kind of stroller did you use? How'd you get your baby to sleep? Like, how'd you do feeding initially? All of these different things. And this is just one arm of that.
I love that, because you don't know what you don't know.
No.
Right.
We don't know.
And this is full transparency, like, I really haven't run since I've had my child because I just thought my body was broken. And now this is the information that you've just given me has been so helpful. And because I started to run and my hip hurt and I had back pain. And now I know it's probably from the weak glutes, right? And when I went to Indigo, that's
floor.
What's that? And
tight pelvic floor, because if you have a hammock and it's like this, and now it's tight on one side, that hammock can't work appropriately. And two muscles of the pelvic floor, the piriformis and the obturator, are hip rotators. And so if you have that like piriformis, like deep hip pain or nagging pain, pelvic floor. And I know, just light bulbs, like, and I'm like, why don't people know this stuff? I'm like banging on people's doors, but it is really interesting.
It's fascinating. And that it gives me like a lot of thought, because like you said, I did like to run, like just like to go and strap on. It felt good and it would get like mental clarity. And I really haven't been able to enjoy it since having my son, because it just felt like my body was broken. And I attributed it, if I'm being honest, I'm like, okay, I'm just getting older and that's just what happens, which is not a great mindset either. Like, I recognize that, right? Because maybe, like you said, maybe it's common, but it's not normal. And so I love that.
I also think, Hilary, like, we, as like perfectionists, it's like, oh, my body betrayed me. Like, it's not doing what I want it to do, or I can't be really good at this like I used to be, so I'm going to choose something else entirely. And I think we just don't know how to correct it. But I mean, the same thing goes for perimenopause and menopause. I mean, like, how you run versus doing heavy lifting, like, that all changes. And we just need the voices out there kind of saying like, all right, this is like pretty easy. This is just how you have to shift things and do things. I also, what you bring up for me, Hilary, is that when we see clients and we're like, what are your goals? And they're like, well, I'd really like to be able to like run across the soccer field with my child and not leak, not have incontinence. And I'm like, okay, but like, what did you used to do? Like, are you lowering your own baseline? Like, are you saying like, I just want to be able to run across the soccer field, but like 4 years ago you were running 5 miles? Like, shouldn't that be your goal?
The bare minimum. We're just asking for the bare minimum.
Lowered the bar so much. Like, oh, I just want to be able to do this. Like, well, you really enjoyed doing this. Like, what do you really love to do? What do you enjoy doing? Let's get you there, because that's really easy. That's plausible to do.
Oh my gosh, Sam. Like, personally, this has been such a powerful conversation for me in so many ways. There's so much knowledge. We're so aligned on all of these things, right? But I love that the communities and finding your voice, right? And tapping into your own intuition. And that's going to really stick with me. And I've said it twice already, but it's common, but not normal. And I think that's a great approach for a lot of things when it comes to women's health too. Like, this might be something common, but it's not normal. And we can navigate this together. And that's what you do.
So if we broke our ankle, we would like sit with our colleagues at lunch and be like, man, this stinks, I can't drive, etc. But if you're leaking urine or you have pain with sex, we don't really talk about it. And so some of it's just destigmatizing the shame and just being like, I know you all are postpartum. Do you have like hemorrhoids too? Like, can we talk about this? Like, what's the story? What do I do about this?
Yeah, because it's not shameful. It's just
Body.
it's
We have
not, you didn't do it to yourself. It's not like you
real
got it on by this has been so wonderful. Thank you so much. And I do want to have one final question we talked about a couple of different transitions. I would love to have you back to hear about how this year is going, maybe after, you talk about making some big changes after the heart attack and kind of settling into that. But I would love to know 3 things, maybe tips or quotes or something that really helps you through all of these transitions. Is there a tool that you always come back to, or a quote that really resonates that you can share with listeners?
There's a couple different things. One is, obviously, I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown, and really looking at my own core values and having my 3 to 5 really strong core values. And every decision that I have to make, I keep it on a notes list on my phone. And I look back and say, does this match with my core values? Like a decision with work, it might not match with my core values. And we think oh, it's work. But over time, that will erode you to not be looking at your core values. So I think looking at your core values is really good. There's so many quotes that I keep and that I think of. I think one of them that I've really embraced over the past year, especially, but over time, if people check out my social media, you can kind of see this floating around, is that I believe in wearing the sparkles. Wear the sequins, wear the sparkles. We're not promised tomorrow. Don't just keep it in the back of your closet. Get up, wear what you love. If it's red lipstick and you're going to the gym, do it. I try to put on earrings every day and lipstick every day because I'm even if I'm in sweatpants, this is who I am. And I think those are really important things for me, and really kind of just dialing in, is that me? Is that me making that decision, or am I making it out of a scarcity mindset or something like that? But I think next year should be this year, 2025 is really interesting because it's about choosing what I really want my life to look like after, post heart attack.
I can't wait to catch up with you and follow up on that.
Thanks
I
so
think it's going to be a really... What's that?
Part 2.
Part 2, exactly. Okay, thank you. Dr. Sam, thank you so much. Where can people find more? You mentioned Instagram if they want to find about Indigo. We'll also put it in the show notes, but just share where people can find out more about you.
You can go to www.indigophysio.com, and also that's our Instagram handle, or drsamduflo.com. And you can find my book, Pelvic Prep School, all major booksellers.
Amazing. We'll also link that below. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for sharing
Thanks for having
all
me.
your wisdom.